maintenant donc la séquence sur les allées de la Première Guerre mondiale. Nous allons commencer avec ce que Paul
So we would like to start first of all with a video by Paul Gough. Paul Gough cannot be amongst us today, and Glenn Williams will replace him. No, Nigel, but I don't remember your name, so Nigel Wells, who will replace him.
Va reprendre ce que Paul Gough a préparé.
I'd like to take the opportunity, by the way, to speak about Mr. Wells. So you are president of an association, Trinet? So a member of Trinet. Could you please say a few words regarding Trinet? Well, I've been living in France for some time, so I'm really in love with avenues of trees, and I've been living very close to one of them. I'm an Australian, and for the anniversary in France, actually, so was serving as an intermediary between Australia and France, so this is why I'm here today. And you will speak in the name of Mr. Paul Gough. So first of all, we will watch a short film, a 3-minute film, because Paul Gough is also an artist, a painter, a writer. And in this film, so we will have a look at the artistic side of Paul Gough. He's also Vice Chancellor, Executive Director, Vice Chairman of the Royal Institute for Technologies in Melbourne. And he's also in charge of the Faculty for Design in the social context in Melbourne, Australia, and he's also an artist and an animator. So we'll start first of all with this short film.
So I've been working on drawings that have been inspired by the Western Front for over 20 years. When I first went there as a postgraduate student, I did lots of drawings of the landscape as it is now, but of late I've been trying to evoke the landscape as it was then. And these kind of drawings here were done as rubbing onto the gravestones and then adding these extraordinary kind of wreath shapes. But what really interested me is the landscape, the empty landscape, the memoryscape, and particularly the trees, the destroyed trees. And living in Australia, you see so much of the petrified forests, burnt trees, scarred trees. And so I've been trying to meld what I've seen on the Western Front, what I've seen in the avenues of trees, with what I've experienced here in Australia. But very recently I've been working on these ones here, and this is a sequence of avenue drawings. I guess I'm very excited about the way that the avenue pulls the eye into the distance, so you get this plunging one-point perspective. And then you get this kind of desolated, devastated interior of the landscape, which moves from left to right. So you get one movement through, another movement from left to right, and then you get this kind of punctuation of these large, deep craters with this extraordinary blue. And these have excited me a great deal lately, and they're the basis of the paper that I want to give at this conference: the avenue, the memoryscape, the punctuation, and then other thoughts. This is one under here that I'm working on at the moment, which is a landscape in very early days, but it quotes from artists like Paul Nash, where Nash made those extraordinary paintings of the men in road, which had landscape format, but also had parts of quite mysterious paintwork that had a parody of trees, of bushes, of clouds. So something I'm trying to work on here is the one-point perspective, and then a memoryscape, a landscape that is actually writhing with action. It's both empty, but it's full. So it's a void of war, but it's full of emptiness.
A few words in French, and then we're speaking to switch to English. So this is the first time that I read the text, and for French people I think it's so much easier because we've got translation, which will be better than the original, I hope so. So I'll switch over to English.
J'ai déjà dit que j'adore les allées.
And as I said, so I'm really in love with avenues of trees because I've been living very close to one of them.
To be the spare Australian, I'm not Paul Gough. The great advantage of making this presentation on his behalf is that his subject is 23 paintings, and I'm going to discover those only by turning around to look at them, because I've never seen them before, and I haven't seen the text, so I ask for your indulgence. And I'm going to have to speed up from time to time, so it will also be edited on the fly. So, let's start with... Yep. Which one is it? That one. Okay. Fine. To many British artists, Meindert Hobbema's painting of the avenue at Middelharnis in the Low Countries was the epitome of foreign, with its hard symmetry and unyielding single-point perspective. It was the very opposite of the meandering and rolling English pastoral. The avenue represented the fierce efficiency of Dutch, Belgian and French agricultural methods. It stood for utilitarian political systems that placed authority in the hands of the few. On the eve of the Great War, the avenue was therefore an emblem of singular authority, hyper-efficient use of space, and ruthless economic necessity. The column march was one of the hallmarks of the early years of the Great War on the Western Front. After an apparently aimless and endless train journey to railhead, troops marched to war along the great tree-lined avenues of northern France and Flanders. Never had an environment seemed so suited to the patriotic mood of determination and purpose. As a proto-futurist, the British painter Richard Nevinson captured the velocity and momentum of the route march. But as the fighting went underground and trenches became the new reality, the representation and reinterpretation of the landscape had to convey the new realities of war. On the way to Shrapnel Corner, a long road across a wide plain. No buildings, no trees except an avenue of precisely spaced Lombardy poplars, which tucked in the road, so to say, no abrupt turnings, no sidetracks, no ups, no downs, a road not to be taken casually, the first step, obviously, committing one to going on to some end. The avenue epitomized the foreignness of France, and it quickly became a popular motif in letters, poetry, and drawings. The exhilaration of the march soon gave way to fatigue. Another wrote of the debilitating infinity of the French highway. The tree-lined sides stretched ahead, the perspective drawing them together in a never-ending V for a couple of kilometers or so. There would be a slight change of direction, and straight ahead, another taunting V. Now, as the fighting of the Western Front became static, the imagery began to change. And Paul likes to address this, apparently, in 3 stages, which are linked to a river. And that is an early stage of a river characterized by propulsion and forward motion, a middle stage where the momentum is lost, and a final stage which is meandering, often idle. So, the early dynamic stage. In its early stage, the avenue was a relentlessly thrusting direct route to the war front. It was like a surrogate railway line, moving troops with maximum speed through a spatially homogeneous and secure environment. Paul Nash's lithograph, Marching at Night, simplifies the avenue and the column into basic geometric blocks. The troops at the front of the column seem to stride out of the lower edge of the picture frame, while the geometrically simplified poplar trees in the avenue cut back into deep pictorial spaces. The middle stage have lost momentum. As the avenue approached the active war zone, it entered a complex middle stage. The symmetry of the trees in an avenue allows for diverse pictorial readings. In an avenue, a missing bough or a snapped trunk could give a clue to the nearness, the proximity or direction of battle. The avenue could also be understood as a pictorial dial, a temporal measure indicating the impact of the passage of time on the desolated battlefield. I quote, "Along the voluminous, velvety roads, one rolls under plummy avenues of trees, and then the road becomes less velvety, and the avenues by degree less plummy, till at once they are only stark skeletons, gap-toothed and shell-shattered in their robes." As it crossed the live battlefield, the direction of the avenue became irrelevant. Their strategic authority was challenged by the firepower that was devastating the landscape. Trenches started to weave as tactical directions, as we see in this watercolour by the soldier artist Edward Handley Reed. The soldier poet T.L. Home identified the changing spatiality of the front. In peacetime, he wrote, "Each direction of the road, as it were, indifferent, it all goes on ad infinitum." By now you know that certain roads leads, as it were, up to an abyss. During this middle stage, many artists, writers, poets, and observers saw how the once powerful formal line of the avenue was shattered. The strong actual arrangements of formal avenues was mangled, bent out of shape until little was left. In the formal gardens of desolated chateaux, it had simply vanished, its energy dissipated into the inertia of desert-like landscape. If a denuded avenue pointed tactically in the wrong direction, it simply became irrelevant. Ian Strang's watercolour, The Men in Road with Tanks, shows a road that is now churned and impassable. The tanks' movements from right to left across the picture is proof that the orientation of the avenue is now meaningless. There are now many paths across the battlefield, not just the one dynamic route implied by the avenue. As it crossed the battlefield, the avenue was remorselessly ground down, trees shattered, straightness lost, forward propulsion abandoned. The late stage. The sole pathway across the landscape now took the form of long blackened timber tracks, each piece laid side by side, floating on the liquid mud. Hopeless greyness, a landscape with only one colour, the dim greyness of mud below and a pall of cloud above. It was surely man's greatest devastation to date. Nothing unobliterated that had been there before, but now only the duckboard tracks, the broken white tapes, the corduroy road over the sea of shell-pitted mud. Genet's painting of the Ypres salient is an exact metaphor for inertia and hopelessness. It seemed to be terminal, the end stage of the avenue, ground down from formal, elegant trees to little more than a meandering and lost ribbon of listless and stagnant water. After the war, the avenue grew again as a powerful motive. This time, not of war, but of peace, a place of memory. Canadian painter Mary Ritter Hamilton describes it as an iconography of sadness, of lost causes, of utter pointlessness. Others saw in the avenue more uplifting, poetic possibilities. To many combatants, the avenue was regarded as the most fitting memorial to fallen comrades. Officer Alexander Douglas Gillespie wrote from the trenches in 1916 that once the war had ended, the governments of France and England should construct one long avenue between the lines from the Vosges mountain to the North Sea. It would, he argued, make a fine, broad road on the no man's land between the lines, with paths for pilgrims on foot and plant trees for shade, and fruit trees so that the soil should not be altogether waste. But Gillespie's vision of Via Sacra was not to be. Despite much enthusiasm, his vision of an endless commemorative avenue, the length of the old Western Front, perished, as did he, in the formless void of the trenches. Thank you. Thank you on behalf of Paul Gough.